Welcome. I'm Bonnie Sewell, owner of American Capital Planning, a fee-only fiduciary and female-owned wealth management firm. I just wanted to make sure that you knew that I was behind the screen today as we chat, and I am going to take myself off video and share my screen with you. So sit back and wait for me to do that, and we'll get started right away. Welcome again to our Fireside Chat, where we take a fun and thought-provoking look at a subject that clients have asked us to consider. Fireside Chats are an exclusive offering for our wealth management clients. Our clients can invite anyone to listen in that they feel may benefit. If the person you hoped would benefit cannot make the live webinar, we're happy to provide a recorded copy. Just send their name and email to Jessie, that's Jessie, at AmericanCapitalPlanning.com, and Jessie will connect them to this or any other Fireside Chat. And if you have questions at any time, hit that Q&A button, it should be along the bottom of your screen, and ask your question. Type it in, and I'll do my best to answer it live. I believe I can see them as we go through. So here's just a few of the topics we're going to touch on for this month's discussion. We're going to talk about rent versus buying, even if you have been or are a homeowner. We're going to talk about how much to spend on housing, technology in homes, selling smart, and a whole bunch of other items. As you can imagine, the topic of homes is so big that we could spend many full days diving into any one aspect or another. And if you want to see something covered that we don't cover today, let us know. We want to get you thinking. And if we get you thinking, we want you to ask your questions. And if we can answer your questions, you're likely to make smart financial choices around the subject at hand. So pull up a chair, grab your beverage of choice, and let's get started. Just what are the numbers around who is renting and who is buying and who these owners are? What we're looking at is 2017 data, and you can see that just about 1/3 of all housing is rented. Well, that leaves about 2/3 occupied by owners. But if you're picturing all those homeowners in a single family home, only about 34% of them are actually in single family homes. Almost 20% of the homeowners are in structures with 2 to 4 units, and a full 42% of that 67% are in structures with 5 or more units. So those are going to be our apartment buildings. And another 4% are in mobile homes. Now, 31% of Gen Xers, just to put a little flavor on this, those are the folks aged 38 to 52, said they were going to rent and continue to rent. Now that number is up 3% from 2016. So that's an indication of a primary home buying age group and what they're thinking. And they're thinking that they're going to keep renting. So it's interesting, at least to me, in predicting on where things might go. In the most recent period, home prices rose faster, as you can see from that third box, than rents by a large margin. But homes, when you consider all the costs, cost more per month than comparable rentals. So what does that mean when home prices rise so much faster than rent? Well, it usually means that home prices are at a high level in the real estate cycle, which if you're shopping, you probably agree that's true. And or there is room to raise rents. So if you're a renter, you might be looking at some rent increases in the future. In the last year, 289 counties across the country, so there are 3,007 counties in the country, so that gives you an idea that about 10% of all counties have flipped from being affordable to buy a house to being more affordable for renting. And that's just in the last year. That means that rental demand will be up and landlords will have room to raise rents. Excuse me. Let's take a look at this chart, which helps us see when and how often home ownership and rental vacancy rates crossed each other. And, why should you care? Well, this is fun stuff for planners like us, but here are some ways to think about this if you're considering renting or buying. And this comes from Census Bureau, basically. If you think about the supply and demand of anything, but here we're talking about housing and the costs associated with buying something when it's in demand, right? So the cost is going to be higher. Or on the flip side, selling when something's in demand, you're going to get more for it. You can see that this might be a good time to be a seller of a home, because as we can see here on the right side of the slide, we've ticked back up, right? And our red line is home ownership and rates, and our blue line is rental rates. But what if you're a buyer? You'll have to be a shrewd negotiator, because as you will see, getting in future slides here in just a few minutes, getting in the home is just the first step or cost. What if you want to rent or keep renting, like those Gen Xers we just heard about? Well, there's reason to believe that rents are going to rise. And there are other charts. I could have thrown many charts in here, which is as a planner, my favorite thing to do. But realizing that you as the listener might not appreciate that, there are other charts that show when we have certain time periods, and I would say we're in one, where the gap between the price of a home and the rates that landlords can charge for rents, certain gaps indicate what's going to happen next. And so I would say that we are in for a period when landlords feel pretty comfortable that they can raise rents, because they've also done the math and they don't think you can go buy or will go buy. So it's important. The most important point of this chart or any other information we're going to share today is that you're always doing, or we're always doing for you, the math for your housing choices and what do your real numbers look like. So charts are interesting, and they can certainly inform us, certainly around trends and how the past looked. But when we're trying to figure out what you should do, we're crunching your numbers. Right now, we're in a period of rising interest rates, although it appears to have slowed down just a little bit. And for people who are in the industry of real estate or in the market for buying or selling homes, we know that we've just in the last week or two gotten a slight dip in interest rates, which had been a little bit of a tear since last year. I think last fall we were over 5% generally for mortgages, or getting close to that, and now we're something lower. So we'll talk about that here on this slide. People often are wondering, well, what's the impact of these changes in rates? Because they do seem small in terms of percentages, but this is where perspective can help. So I'm going to give you a little bit of history about rates, because if you're like me, you've forgotten when the last time we had real high rates was, and you may even be thinking that the low rates were more recent than they really were. So between the lowest mortgage rates between 1971 and today, we're actually in 2012. Now, they hadn't gone up very much all the way through 2016, 17-ish, but in 2012, they were actually the lowest, and that rate was 3.31%. The highest rate in that same time period, so 1971 to today, was in 1981, at 1863, so 18.63% for a mortgage rate. Now, in 1981, for those of us who are old enough to buy a house then, you might recall that wasn't everybody's rate. So in any given year, there's a high, a low, and an average. And your credit rating is going to be a huge factor in whether you're offered the lowest and best rate in any period or something else. So even back in 1981, when people with poor credit or circumstances that made them a higher risk, they were paying 18.63%. There were plenty of people who were getting only, putting that in air quotes, 14% or a little better. So just remember that in any period, you're trying to get the very best rate that can be offered given your credit circumstances and the risk that the lender thinks you have or they have in offering you a mortgage. Now, we're going to go through another little bit of math that's not on the slide. So if you just listen for a minute to this example, the median home price in the US for 2018 was just over $300,000 or $302,000. We're going to use, in our example, we're going to use 500,000 because the math is a little easier, and for most of my listeners today, we live in a fairly high-priced area. So in our example, we're going to ignore and avoid PMI, or private mortgage insurance. So that's the extra insurance we pay for when we are unable or unwilling to put down 20% towards the payment of the home. So in this example, we don't have that. So just on a $500,000 house, we're putting down our 20%. So that's $100,000. 500,000 minus 100,000 down payment leaves us a $400,000 mortgage. Interest rates are running about 4.125%-ish right now. And so your monthly payment for principal and interest, not including taxes and insurance, just principal and interest, we're only talking about the home loan, is about $2,434 a month. So you say, okay, I could buy a $500,000 house by putting down 20% or 100,000, and under today's interest rate conditions, I can expect to pay about $2,434 a month for the loan. If we go, and let's just say for our buyer today, for whatever reason, she decides not to buy today, she decides to buy in 2021. Well, fast forward to 2021. By the way, my crystal ball is always broken. However, in this example, I'm going to pretend that in 2021, our interest rates are now 6.5% for that same mortgage. Back in 2019, we could have had for 4.125%. And with all the same facts, $500,000 home, $100,000 down, our monthly payment has risen from $2,434 a month to just over $3,000. And if we get into crazy times again, like the 1980s, and we're at, for example, 10%, that same loan, we haven't increased the cost of our house, we haven't increased the amount of our loan. The only thing that's changed is the interest rate. And now our $2,400 a month payment goes to over $4,000 a month. And of course, that's all before taxes and insurance. So now we're probably getting fairly unaffordable for what you thought you were buying. But the point of sharing that example is to help you understand that even though we are well past 2012's all-time lows from 1971 to today, rates on mortgages of 3.31, you should not feel bad about paying a 4.1% rate on your loan, or I would say even up points from that, because we are still historically in a very sweet spot when it comes to interest rates. And if I were to turn on my crystal ball and hope it's working today, my guess would be that we're going to go higher before we go lower. So you can see the same math on this slide. This is just another way of saying exactly what we just said, except they say it this way. For every 1/4% increase in the interest rate, the value of the home that you can afford goes down by 2.5%. So just if you play with this chart for a little bit, you can see the impact, right? As the rates go up, I can afford less home for the same payment every month. That's the whole point of this slide. And the reason that you always want to do your math is because this is where people often start, and sometimes this is where they stop. And we're going to suggest that when you're thinking about buying a home, that's way too early to stop in the math. We have more math to do, which we're going to talk about. Okay, pros and cons of renting and buying. So we're going to stay away from some of the emotional stuff, which is a lot of the reason that people find themselves in one of these situations or the other. And of course, because we're the planners that we are, we're going to go back to the math. And what we've done here is pick a home that has a home value in the market of $575,000 if we're selling this home, and can rent for $2,800 a month if we're renting this home. So one thing to think about here is, you know, if the basic question is, can I afford $2,800 a month? Yes, if I can. Shouldn't I buy? I don't know. Let's take a look at some of the details around that decision. First of all, how much cash will it take to get into the renting situation? So if you're a renter or have ever been a renter, you know that it's pretty common to ask for first month's rent, last month's rent, a damage deposit, sometimes a pet deposit. Pretty sure every building is non-smoking at this point, so if you do something like that, they may ask for other kinds of deposits beyond the damage deposit, but let's just stick with the first three, because those you find almost universally. First month's rent, last month's rent, and that damage deposit. So in this case, if we just have those three, that's $8,400 to get into this home. That's before we go in and we change the locks, because we even do that on a rental, right? And we give the landlord back a key, but we don't want the past tenant to be able to get in, or the past homeowner or whomever. And then we might be kind of close to done on the renting, because we're not likely to change the window coverings and make material additions to the home that we're renting. Let's go and look at this same home if we were to buy it. So one of the things that we have to think about is we're paying $575, but of course we're not paying all of that when we go in, but we're certainly bringing $115,000 in cash. That's our 20% down payment from somewhere, and probably our accounts is where we're getting that unless it's gifted to us. So we're bringing that money to the table. And then we're going to have somewhere between 2 to 5% of that total, $575, due in closing costs. So on this home, that's somewhere between $11,000 and $28,000, $28,000 being sky high, and hopefully you're negotiating something much closer to 2%. So we can be the bad guy in that situation if you need that help. But then you've got the down payment, and of course we've got, when we're buying a home, our prepaids. So that's another, say, 1.3%-ish, or $7,500 here in this home. This is before you unlock the door for the first time. We're 151, 250 in on the high side, or on the low side if we negotiate those closing costs well, we're at about 133,500. Now, that $115,000 down payment is locked up until you sell, so that's an opportunity cost, right? If I'm renting and I have $115,000 that I don't spend on a down payment, I can make that money work for me in other ways. If I take that $115,000 and I stick it in a home, nothing wrong with that, but it doesn't do anything for me unless the price of my home grows, and then we can do the math to figure out how well that's growing and how it might have done in the market had it been there. And of course, there's market loss. You could certainly lose the money in the market as well. But all those transaction costs that you incurred to get into the house are lost to the process. So the prepaids are just that. They go forward and pay your future bills, taxes, and insurance, so those are not lost. But the transaction costs, the closing costs, the points you paid, things like that, the lock you may have paid to close the rate off from being having it rise in the time you're doing the mortgage. All of those costs are lost to the process. So looking at the math matters, because we can make the argument that you need to live in that home for at least 5 to 7 years, maybe sometimes 10. Again, math matters. We'd want to do the math on your numbers as an owner before that math for buying works in your favor. And we're going to drive this point home a little harder in some other slides. So keep that thought, buying and renting, your decision. Lots of things go into the decision, but when we're talking about the math, we want you to do all the math. And that leads us to, how much should I spend on housing? What are the guardrails I should think about so that I don't get stuck not having enough money for other things I want to do? Well, we're pretty big on intentional spending here, so we want you to think carefully about what you're spending on a house to live. One thing that we think about when we are thinking about our sanctuary, which is the 30% of the pie here for your home or your shelter, is lifestyle creep. If I overspend for my situation, not making a judgment on what you picked, we're making a judgment on your ability to live in the home, pay for it, and enjoy the other things you've identified as things you care about funding. Lifestyle creep is when I buy into an expensive neighborhood and I feel the need or the responsibility to upgrade to the level of my neighbors when all I could do was get in the front door. And if you pay attention the next time you're driving out and about, you may see homes like this. You may see homes where they were able to get into the physical home, but they cannot afford any outside space, no decks, no landscaping. So you don't see that a lot, but that is one indication that it's less of a value judgment or culture judgment. It's more of a, we got into this house by the skin of our teeth and this is all we can afford. So lifestyle creep is one issue. The other issue is if I spend more than my 28, 30%, maybe a little bit more on my sanctuary or shelter or space that I live in, all these other categories are challenged to be funded in the way that I think they also need to be funded. So of course we want a rainy day fund. We want a little wiggle room because life happens. You may choose to give back to your community, your church, to whomever. And so that's an option that may be taken away if we add that percentage back to our sanctuary, shelter, or space. Probably we want to have a little fun along the way. We certainly need to take care of our health. We always have to eat. And finally, transportation is pretty important to most of us, and we have a cost for transportation even when we don't have a car. We pay the metro, or we fly to our destinations if we're in sales or whatever. So, and then the last piece is keeping the lights on, right? Because it's not enough to get into the space. We've got to be able to pay the utility bills and all the other things that come with that. So, there are also hidden costs when you buy. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. But if I buy a home instead of that, if I buy this home instead of renting it, when I get in there, not only am I changing the locks, I'm changing the window coverings. Maybe my furniture doesn't match, so I'm changing the rugs or the floors, or I'm changing my furniture. A lot more potential for spending in that sanctuary space if I'm buying versus renting. So 30% is our ideal hit spot. And because we're planners, we want to model your actual math. What are you thinking of doing? You've looked at the house. What did you identify as stuff you're going to change when you get in there? Okay, I think I see a question on this, so I'm going to take a minute to answer that. And it looks like the question is 30% of spending pre-tax or post-tax? It's a great question. I would frame it just slightly differently and say, is that a figure based on gross income or net income? Same question, asked differently. And it is based on gross income. So 30% of your gross income. So that's before taxes or pre-tax. That's our guardrail. And of course, it's pretty easy to scope this out. So if you need any help with that, we can help. But that's what we want you to think about before you actually sign on the dotted line, to make sure that you don't get in and now you can't go to dinner, you can't spend time with your friends because you're a slave to your housing bills. And then one more point, which we will make in another slide as well, but really it's something people forget about so routinely. I feel a need to say it several times. It's the hidden costs of when we own. When we rent, I'm writing a check, and that's pretty much the end of my responsibility. But when we buy, there are redecorating costs. If we end up doing that, there's repair costs, there's replacement costs. Replacement costs can include things like the roof. If I'm a renter, I never have to worry about that. So the other thing that you might want to do is a looking at everything report. So, but when you figure out your housing, you also want to figure out these other pieces of the pie to see if you're within the guardrails on all of these. So take, for example, your ride. Maybe your work requires that, let's say you're a realtor, and your ride requires that you have a big car and a beautiful car. So your ride may exceed this threshold. So then if that's true, if this is up to 20%, then maybe you're on the road a lot, maybe you're paying those tolls. So then we're scooping from some other place. Okay, enough about that. This sounds like an incredibly boring topic, but Let me tell you, it gets exciting pretty fast if we have a title issue. So why should you consider title insurance? And when does it make sense to buy an owner's title policy? Title policies protect just the lender unless you have an owner's policy. So think about this. There's 6 different reasons that I want you to think about getting a title policy as an owner, and then we'll move on from this. And the first reason is because people really believe, I've never heard of a title problem. I've never even heard of anyone having a title problem. It won't happen to me. And I'm here to tell you that it can happen to you. So that's the number one reason, because it can. And if it can, then you should protect that risk, right? That's just our whole motto of breathing in the practice, is to protect what you have and grow from there. You can't, if you don't protect it, you can't grow it. And title problems are horrific if they happen. So the second reason is a revoked power of attorney. So what's that mean? It means that a deed or a mortgage might have been made under a power of attorney that gets terminated. It ends. And that means it would be void. Now you've got a title problem. So a document signed under a power of attorney in and of itself invites additional scrutiny. But a POA, or power of attorney, can be revoked anytime, and they don't have to tell you or the people with the deed that it's been revoked. The records at the registry wouldn't necessarily show that it's been revoked, and so there's not an easy way to check. So that's another sort of big pothole. If you've got the insurance, it doesn't matter, you're protected. Then there's another reason: children born after a will is signed. If someone had a child born after the execution of a will and then they die, a fact that would that would entitle, under many states' laws, that child to claim his or her share of the property. And so if you think this doesn't happen to you, I would just say, have you updated your estate plans recently? Because we find most of the time that's a forgotten task for people. So a lot of times when a will gets created, the person sticks it in a cabinet or drawer and never looks at it again, figuring, yeah, it's done. If something happens to me, we all know what's going to happen. But a will doesn't deal with future-born children usually, and that leaves the property open-ended if the child should ever make a claim. So we're not saying anything bad about the child. We're saying that the title isn't protected unless you've thought about that and have the insurance. Another reason: title insurance covers attorney fees and court costs. So if you ever have seen a title challenge, they are long and they are expensive. And if you have insurance, it's going to cover attorney's fees and court costs. Big, huge benefit. Another one is elder abuse or any kind of shenanigans where a deed or mortgage is signed under duress. Doesn't happen often, but happens often enough for it to be a concern. And the last reason is because, let's say we're going to the closing table and now we've got a problem with the title, or we think we do. Costly delays on closing can be, well, just what I said, costly. And so clearing a title takes time. So get your owner's title policy. It's an extra expense, but in the big scheme of things, it's almost unnoticeable. And it's one of those things where it's especially true when you have a problem. It's a big problem. So make sure you're protected. All right, behind closed doors. This is a conversation on this slide about how much stuff do we have. And I'm not looking at you, I'm looking at me, and we all have a lot of stuff. So when we think about our shelter or our space or our sanctuary, how much stuff do we have? And how much space do we need for it? If you buy it, you got to store it, dust it, clean it, insure it. Remember, when you're thinking about your space, we all love storage in our country. It's a big deal, right? And so it's great that you want to have storage space. The problem is when we live somewhere, we tend to fill it up over time. So just be thinking about how you're going to use space. The other thing I've seen people do is buy their primary homes with the idea that people will visit. So we got to have 2 extra bedrooms for that one time a year when so-and-so visits. And I would suggest to you, ultimately, it may be more prudent. Well, you can always run the numbers to see if this is true, to put them up in a hotel for 3 days, and you have that expense versus a bigger home than you need or want for the occasional use of guests and family. Okay, here's this last bullet I want to spend a minute on because this is an exercise we've done for a long time with people to get them thinking about their things and their house in a different way. So let's just say there's a fire and you have to get out. What do you take? So I want to share with you some things that are true, we know statistically. Remember the stop, drop, and roll fire drills from school? And if your house is on fire, 80% of Americans think they have 5 or 10 minutes to get out. And that's just not true. According to Underwriter Laboratories, which does state-of-the-art fire safety testing, you've got 3 minutes or less. Now, depending on your home and the age of your home and its construction. So I want to put that caveat in there. But homes burn faster today, the newer ones, and they don't have to be that new to have this be true, burn much faster today than they used to in the past. And that's the nature of the way they're built and the things we have in them. So most people underestimate the speed and power of fire and smoke. And you don't want to be fumbling with a fire extinguisher or grabbing your photo albums or even trying to rescue your cat. And when people say, when people are asked in a survey, what would you take? They start to create a list. And that's a normal response, but there isn't any time for that with 3 minutes or less to get out of that house. So one way to think about how to create more space in your house for things that you really care about and your life is to play the mental game of what's worth keeping under extreme conditions. And I know that there's a show out there, and I don't watch a lot of television, I'm probably going to get the name wrong, but I think it's called Marie Kondo or something like that. And that person is apparently getting lots of people to think about what they have and what they want. And so that's, I totally recommend viewing that if it would help you think about this, because and I'll tell you another place this crops up. Your parents are getting older or pass, and you have the task when you come to their home of getting rid of their things or helping them downsize. If you've ever lived that, you know what I'm talking about. And you say to yourself, oh my gosh, why did they keep all these things? I would suggest that you go home and look around and see if you're not on the path to do the very same thing. So just be thinking about that and keep that in mind. Doing or paying. When we're in our home, some of the costs that we have are choices. Do I clean my home or pay someone to clean it? Do I mow the grass or pay someone to mow it? And you can do this with a ton of decisions, but these are real costs, so you need to think about them. And this extends to certain kinds of improvements. Do I go solar? And if I do, when do I break even on the cost? Do I get any tax benefits for doing that? If I add a hot tub, how much extra electricity am I paying for? What do my water bills look like? So most clients know we're a real stickler for intentional spending and understanding spending. So we do have a property spending sheet. If you would like that, just ask. I hate to keep tasking Jessie with these things, but she's the perfect person to send that over to you so you can really add up what you're paying for your home. Need a lift? We're seeing a lot of this in homes. It's not an uncommon amenity anymore. Elevators in homes. And there's a couple of versions of these elevators. They can be ADA compliant or not. So I'll give you an example you may be familiar with. If you rent homes in the Outer Banks, many of them have elevators, and it's interesting, most of them would not be ADA compliant. They're not there necessarily for aging reasons or even disability reasons. They are there to get the groceries upstairs in a more efficient way. Now, sometimes there are so depending on what your need is, I would say that with an aging population, an elevator is a brilliant idea. And with a very large disabled population, and any one of us, speaking from personal experience, can be disabled for any period of time. When I had my ankles replaced, elevator would have been really nice. But there are other low-tech versions of what you're trying to accomplish. So let's say what you're really trying to do is avoid the lifting, carrying chore. You're not trying to address disabilities yet. And so remember there was something in homes that was much more common, much earlier in the 19th century, called a dumbwaiter. And the idea there was it was a shaft with ropes, and you literally could bring a small platform up from the bottom floor to any other floor, and it would carry dishes, food, clothing, any number of things that you needed transferred from one floor to the other. We can do the same idea with laundry chutes. Not as common in homes today, but I suspect with technology changing, we will see chutes that go up and down. Usually in the past, they've just been going down. So if I have to get clothes down to the laundry room and I don't want to carry them, I'm throwing them down a chute. So that's a great use of space, and it addresses this idea of how do we age in place, address a disability issue, or just have more convenience with less body stress. But if you're of another mind, and I am of this mind, hey, the exercise is good for you. But when people get older or they have physical, issues, it can be extremely helpful to think about making the home more helpful to them. So another idea here is stair chairs. You've seen these probably. These are the kind that ride the railing. When we design a home or remodel a home, we might do it with wider doors to accommodate wheelchairs. We might lower our countertop heights to be able to sit in a chair, whether that's a wheelchair or just a chair because our backs are not strong or our legs are not strong or whatever. When we're doing kitchen work, there is pretty clever laundry room technology and laundry room setup out there. So we've taken a very physical chore and we can make it more comfortable. So all I wanted to do with this slide is get you thinking about adaptive technologies when you replace or upgrade something in your home, because even though you might say, hey, I'm only 33, why would I need that? Well, do you have parents and friends with disabilities or parents who are aging? If you have pets, think about how you might set up a bathing station for them. Saves you money, lets you be able to not have to reach over a tub, for example. Pocket doors are another example. They're out of the way. Of course, your imagination and budget are really the only limitations here, but creativity is key and good use of space. There's contractors that are specifically trained in adaptive home design. The more adaptive you make your home, the more it will serve you and a large number of people on resale. Living better through technology. As you know, we're huge fans of technology. We think it makes our world mostly better with good digital hygiene, which we'll address in one of our last slides. But one of the things that we do want you to think about is your tech listening to you in your home? That's an issue, and an issue you should be cognizant of. And then big TVs do not make a smart home. They make a big black box in your room, but that's a personal choice. But that doesn't mean you've got a smart home, even if you've got a smart TV. So I wish I could say that consumer demand is bringing us really great solutions because we're demanding it, but actually it looks like the consumer is a little bit stuck on cool speakers like Alexa, and then the other thing we seem to be a little stuck on is thermostats. Both, hey, it's a start. Both things are good and both things are useful. But by the way, we're not using these speakers to shop, which was the expectation. I think the developers thought if we could speak to something, we would make our shopping decisions even faster and less considered. But that isn't really what's happening. So we don't have that yet in the numbers that they were hoping, but we can expect more voice control on things besides speakers in our home. So I could talk to my refrigerator, my washer, dryer, etc. Another statistic is that men are using technology more than women in the home. Ladies, time to step up. How many of you are using phone apps to control your heat and air or start the oven before you get home? And I'm not assuming that all the women are the only people who cook. My husband often starts the oven before we get home. It's quite nice. We've got this technology of Ring, right? So Ring you may be familiar with as a product name, a brand name. It sees people at your door. We have cameras on our home. They're very effective both for wildlife and life that is wild, as in people who might come by. We can see deliveries. You may have seen the company Nest has a video camera on a doorbell, so it sits right on the doorbell. But my only issue with that particular product, and I don't know this for a fact, is that it does look fairly easy to destroy. And the strength of any security system is its ability to either stay hidden or stay in place so that it can do its job. Keyless entries are becoming much, much more popular, and they're an interesting idea. We've been using those, if you think about it, for a long time on the side of a garage. We put in a code and our garage door goes up, but using them on all the doors can be a much more secure situation. And you obviously have the choice to reprogram them and code them as often as you'd like. We are already using CO2 monitors, security systems. These are well known. So what else might be coming? Integration of our smart home devices, air and water monitoring in the home beyond carbon monoxide, beyond those CO2s and radon, through our phones. These could come to include water and pipe leak alerts. We expect to see embedded computing, like menu planning on the front of your fridge. And if you're sitting down, robots that can cook a 3-course meal that actually tastes good. Now, these are demos so far, as far as I know, but basically what they're showing is a really smart oven. There's still a personal interaction. But hey, as a person over 50, I really appreciate any improvement. And so one of them that I really like to see is mirrors that can see what others see before I leave my house. So years ago, we increased the technology in our cars. If you look at your car mirror, it used to be a plain piece of glass. Many of you are too young to even remember that. But today, there's significant technology inside that mirror in your car. And we're bringing that into our mirrors at home. They can be security systems that can see from the mirror. They can also see things on an older person's face that older person can't see with their own eyes anymore. So smart vanity mirrors are coming. We expect decorating gadgets to come along and be more advanced, so they could change the lighting in our room, which we already have to some degree, of course, but I'm talking about significant changes in lighting. They could change the color of the room and more. So pretty exciting stuff. Now, the last thing I want to leave you with on technology in a home, because it's a huge topic, is windows and doors. They might get a lot of attention when you're thinking about their decorative aspects, but they usually don't get as much attention for security. And aside from keyless door entry, I think these might include phone notifications when a door or window opens. Of course, we already have motorization of window treatments. That's already here, and that can protect utility costs and add privacy. But windows can also be made close to unbreakable, even with baseball bats. That's another security feature. So one thing that you could do if you have a concern about security is check your windows and doors and see the technology that's come along there. We have another question. So I'm going to answer this question, and it says, can you incorporate too much technology in your home? Yes, I think the answer is yes. And I would say the 2 ways that might show up is, one, you've overspent on technology that's going to be outdated, and think about wiring a home in a particular way using fiber optic, which is good now, or speaker wire, which may or may not be important in the future as everything goes to Wi-Fi. So you could install technology that will be fairly quickly outdated, and you've spent the money and now you've got to respend some money. And I think the other main issue with spending too much in technology is wait till it's fully developed, because a lot of technology, as we all know, breaks. So that would be my 2 comments on that. Good question. Thank you for asking that. Space matters. On the left, we have a very large apartment building, which may or may not be appealing to you. On the right, we have what we would say is a very typical and pretty single-family home, which may or may not be appealing to you. And it only matters what's appealing to you. So one of the things that I want to at least point out is on the left, for example, and I'll just share a quick personal experience. Most of my prior married life, I enjoyed the home on the right, a single family home, and it was nice and I liked it very much, but it was suburban living. And for me, Bonnie Sewell, suburban living isn't a good fit. It certainly was when I was raising children, but after that and before that, it's not my preferred place to live. But schools are so important that can be a major reason for anyone to live in a single family home or in a particular neighborhood. So suburban living, I equate with good schools. Those were my choices as I was moving around. It also put a stake in the ground, literally, because you own the lot underneath. And then, you probably have some degree of privacy that's better or different when we're talking about single family living. But I will say that after my divorce, I took the time to live in an apartment and I rented. And because I was living in Miami at the time, the cost for living down there was quite high. And my choices were rent on the water, which was a pretty equivalent to living or owning inside the I-95, which is mosquito land for me. Didn't want to live there. So I rented. I was able to live on Biscayne Bay. I loved my view. I loved the elevator. I just, we had shared space that I didn't have to pay for directly in terms of ownership. So we had party space. I was downtown. I could walk more, exercise room, pool. This slide is to get you thinking about intentional space and what works in your life, and then in the market where you're living, what choices do you have? So, and in any given market, which we're going to see in just a minute, these choices could be really different from each other in terms of expense. Okay, I do have another question, and this is on investing, and they're asking, are there tips on investing in real estate? Whole nother topic, happy to do a whole fireside chat on that. But there are a couple of things I'll just say if that's where you are right now and you're looking for a few tips. How long will you be holding the property? Because that's a big part of the math. And then there's just no substitute for doing the math on a rental real estate. By the way, tax laws have changed dramatically for rental real estate. So we will happily cover that in another fireside chat, but do not invest without knowing current tax law. Okay, so we've been talking throughout the presentation about how expensive it is to get into a house, which by the way is not a reason for not getting into a house. It's just that we find that people aren't adding those costs up, and so they're doing things in their head and mentally making spending choices and so forth without full information, and that's what we really want you to do. So how long do you have to stay in your house to overcome those transaction costs, which are the loss costs, which are the closing costs, right? And so in any given market, it could be pretty different, right? And so one of the things that I want you to think about with this slide in particular is because we all listen to family and friends when we're making our financial decisions, and while that can certainly be helpful and supportive, sometimes we're not thinking clearly about their situation versus ours. So if I'm in LA and I'm telling my sister in Atlanta, you need to stay in your house like 9 years to make up those transaction costs. But in Atlanta, that's not true. Most of the time, it's closer to 4 years. So it's helpful to have these conversations, but we want to deal with the facts that are in our market. And so the great thing about that is, and what we already know about, say, Los Angeles versus the Atlanta market, is Los Angeles is going to be expensive and potentially only getting more expensive. So we might expect to see rather large increases there. And I'm not commenting on the housing stock or the style of living or anything, just that market tends to rise pretty quickly and often sort of unrelentingly. Take a more stable, well, stable isn't a good word, take a more flat market like Atlanta. Might not be too sexy in terms of increasing home values. So when you sell, you might not get the great big windfall. But the great thing about that is it takes less time to recover your transaction costs. And in the first place, you may get quite a bit more home and land for the same dollars that you would get in another market. And of course, we're sitting here in the DC market, so we're right in the middle of Atlanta and Los Angeles in terms of time to get back our closing costs and other costs. So the point of this slide is simply to remind you that your facts matter more than rules of thumb. Smart selling. We get to the end of this process. We decide we're selling our home, and there's so much to think about. And selling a home for many of us is emotional simply because it's such a big transaction. And if that weren't enough to make it emotional, it may be where we raised our children. It may be where we divorced a spouse or buried a spouse. I mean, there's just so much inside our homes that matter to us. Selling can be quite emotional. And of course, as planners, we're right there to tell you, you shouldn't pay any attention to those emotions. Look at the numbers, which is unrealistic, of course. But we do want you to think carefully about the things that we have learned that matter in selling. Now, these are going to match up with your best realtor's suggestions. So if I can even bookend what your best realtor would tell you, I'm happy to do it. Realtors, the best of them, get paid very well because they help you so much in a big transaction. Get that transaction done well. So here are the tips that we want you to be thinking about. First of all, things that you've learned to live with in the house are often deal breakers for buyers. So if you've lived in your house for a long time, you've gotten used to it, and a buyer comes in with fresh eyes. So while there might still be uninformed buyers out there, they are surely smaller in number than they've ever been. So if it's been 10 to 20 years since you last sold a home, you may be living with delusions about buyers that just don't apply anymore. So the first secret is to go look at homes, and I'm going to go a little out of order here, so I apologize, but go look at homes on the market in your area and apply your reaction to those people's homes and what they're asking. Go back and do it to your own home. And if you're really moving, then this will not be your home for long, so this becomes a business deal. Be smart as you would in any business deal. So pricing it right. Very important. There's strategies out there about pricing it where it should be priced or even a little below, hoping to get multiple bids in a time of low inventory. I think that's a brilliant strategy. And as a great realtor explained to me, a lot of times people want to price it high thinking inventory is low. Surely they'll get their price, but that isn't how buyers think. So when you're selling your home, stand in the shoes of that buyer and think about their thinking in terms of your home. All right, the next one is half-empty closets. This is to remind you that when you go into your closets, it all looks normal to you because you've been living with it that way. If you take half of it out and maybe half again and get it and either get rid of it or store it till the sale goes, that's huge because buyers will snoop around. That's their job, to investigate this great big purchase they're making. So be sure to keep things tidy and cleaned up. And if you need to get rid of stuff, write it off and get the donation and to people that can use what you cannot use or are not using. The next one is not just light it up. If I can see it, can I smell it? So maximizing the light in your home and outside. So I would always have, I rarely see this, but it's always something I truly enjoy as a buyer. Getting a picture taken at night with the lights on. The house looks warm and inviting. So think about getting that picture as part of your portfolio of ways to show your house to the market. After location, good light is one thing that almost every buyer says they want in a home. So you're taking down drapes, you're cleaning the windows, the lampshades, you're increasing the light wattage, and those lights are going to be on when your home is shown. You might be having outdoor lighting on and trying to make the house bright and cheery and inviting. And then the other thing that's really important, if you cook a lot like I do, I use garlic like some people use salt, make sure when you come into your home, you don't smell anything, perhaps except warm bread and good cookies. But I mean, we all have smells to our homes, and so be conscious of that and try to get that out before putting the home on the market. The next one is playing the agent field. The best realtors are real professionals. Find one of those and hire them. I realize they might be busy, but they're probably extremely responsive. That's what's made them so successful. And it would also set the bar to make other realtors get up to that service level. This is a great big transaction and you want the best professional to help you. So this, unless your best friend happens to also be the best real estate professional, this is not the time to use family and friends. This is the time to use the best professional, and there are plenty out there. You're just going to have to do a little research. And you also want to do make sure that your realtor is tech savvy, because all your buyers for the most part are tech savvy. So you don't want that disconnect. Concealing the critters. I'm a pet person. I like pets. I don't want to see pets or evidence of pets when I'm looking at someone's home to buy. So a lot of simple things, again, coming in with fresh eyes. We don't want to see the bowls of dog food or the kitty litter box or pet hair. Just remember that when you're getting your house ready. Don't over upgrade. So a lot of back and forth on this, and as far as opinions and what people think. You could go either way, but I would say that most of the time, kitchens and baths you're going to get the money for, and pretty much everything else is up for grabs. But I would concede to realtors in your market on that point, but I would say be careful about over upgrading, because there's a fairly good chance you won't get your money back. So you want to keep that money in your hand and let the new homeowner upgrade as they wish. Taking the home out of your house, this is often a painful thing for people as they sell their house, and I've got a link there which you can't do anything with in this electronic presentation, so I apologize, but happy to send you the article afterwards. Suffice it to say that staging your home sells your home. And there's a great statistic out there, because this question is off here. What's the value of staging? And in fact, we've got that. It's for every $100 you spend, we think there's potentially $400 added to your price. So think about that when you're thinking about staging your home. And just think about yourself when you go into model homes. We love that, right? Because it gets us thinking about how we might live there. It's very clever of them to do things that way. The next one is kitchen comes first. You're not actually selling your house, you're selling your kitchen is what some people think, but it is important. People eat in their kitchens. It's where they spend time with family. It's where people gather. So just cautious thinking about how your kitchen would hit someone else. Always be ready to show. This is a difficult part of selling your home because people can come by at any time. So you're basically living like you never actually live for the time that you're selling your home. And then the last one is the first impression is the only impression. I know when I'm looking for a home, I've got pen in hand and voice recorder because I'm trying to remember everything. And when I'm walking up, I'm already talking. So no matter how good the inside of your home looks, they've already thought something about it before they ever walk through the door. And you don't get a second chance for that. And the other thing that we know is true about buyers is if they think they have to change the shrubs or the fencing or something outside, they're going to attach a much higher value to it than it probably costs to get done. And the last thing I'd add to this point is professional photos are a must. We don't want to fake anything. Certainly or deceive any potential buyers, but we want our house in the very best light, and that would include drone shots. So I just don't know any home that doesn't benefit from drone shots of the neighborhood or the walk-up or something like that. So keep that in mind. We are closing in on the end of our time, and I can't thank you enough for joining us, but I hope we got you thinking. Figuring out your space can be an extremely rewarding experience. You can approach it, and I want you to approach it as the intrinsic decision it is, so that you'll likely end up loving where you live. And before signing off, I just want to make sure that you let us know what you want us to cover in future chats. So I'm attending a crypto asset conference in Salt Lake City in March. And crypto assets, if you're not familiar at all, is Bitcoin, blockchain, all that kind of stuff. And I'll be happy to share what other innovative investors are doing when I get back from that. But we can cover anything, and it may be a much more mundane topic like college spending or anything at all. So that's what we'd love to hear from you on. And to that point, I'm just going to see if there's any other questions, and let me get there and see if I can answer them. I think I actually have answered all the questions in the queue, and we are just right almost at 3 p.m. So I thank you again for joining us, and please tune in next time. If you know someone who would benefit from the presentation, you'd like us to send it over to them, like I said, just get a hold of Jessie and we'll take care of it for you. Thank you very much.